There are things you never expect to hear at your own husband's memorial. I sure didn't expect to hear my sister's voice cutting through the crowd, announcing to 60 people that the baby in her arms belonged to my dead husband. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because when I tell you how this all unfolded, you'll understand why I was the one smiling at the end. My husband Daniel passed away 11 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. By the time the doctors caught it, he had maybe 8 weeks left. Those 8 weeks were the longest and shortest of my entire life. We'd been married for 6 years, together for 9. He was a software engineer, quiet, methodical, the kind of man who planned everything 3 steps ahead. I didn't fully understand just how far ahead he'd been planning until much later. After he died, I basically disappeared. I took a leave of absence from my teaching job. I stopped answering calls. I let the mail pile up. My mother called every other day. My father sent long text messages about how I needed to rejoin the living. But grief doesn't work on a schedule. Some mornings I'd wake up and reach for his side of the bed, and the cold sheets would hit me all over again like the first time. My sister Sophie was 2 years younger than me. We were never close. Not really. Growing up, she was the loud one, the pretty one, the one who always knew exactly what to say to get what she wanted. I was the quiet older sister who got good grades and stayed out of trouble. Our parents never played favorites, or at least that's what I told myself for 30 years. About 3 months after Daniel's death, Sophie started calling more often than usual. She'd ask about the house, about Daniel's life insurance, about whether I'd started sorting through his affairs. At the time, I thought she was just being practical in that blunt way of hers. I didn't think much of it. Then, around the 9-month mark, my mother called with a request that surprised me. She wanted me to organize a memorial gathering for Daniel's 1-year anniversary. A celebration of life, she called it. Family, close friends, maybe 30 or 40 people at the house Daniel and I had shared. The house that was now just mine, a 4-bedroom colonial in Westfield, New Jersey, worth about $850,000 on a good day. Daniel had also left behind a savings account, some investments, and a modest life insurance payout. All told, his estate came to a little over $1 million. I didn't want to host anything. The thought of filling our home with people, of hearing them say he's in a better place one more time, made my skin crawl. But my mother pressed, and Daniel's mother, Margaret, gently encouraged me too. Margaret had been my rock through everything. She was the kind of woman who showed up with homemade soup and didn't ask questions, who sat with me in silence when silence was all I could handle. She'd lost her only son, and somehow she still found the strength to hold me together. So I agreed. I spent a week cleaning the house, arranging photos of Daniel on a long table in the living room, ordering catering from his favorite Italian place. I even wore the blue dress he always said made my eyes look like the ocean. It felt like the right thing to do. One last beautiful evening in his honor, then maybe I could start figuring out who I was without him. The day of the memorial, people started arriving around 5. My parents came early to help set up chairs. Sophie showed up fashionably late, which was typical. What wasn't typical was the infant car seat she carried in one hand. Inside was a baby boy, maybe 6 months old, with a round face and dark curly hair. I'd heard through my mother that Sophie had a baby a few months back, but she'd been vague about the details. And honestly, I hadn't had the energy to ask. Sophie, I didn't know you were bringing the baby. What's his name? She smiled at me in a way that didn't quite reach her eyes. His name is Lucas, and actually, there's something I need to talk to you about later. Something important. I nodded and went back to greeting guests, not thinking twice about it. The evening was going smoothly. People shared memories of Daniel. His college roommate told a funny story about a road trip to Vermont. His old boss talked about how Daniel once stayed up 72 hours straight to fix a critical system failure. Margaret sat in the corner, quietly holding a framed photo of Daniel as a little boy, smiling through her tears. Then, about 2 hours in, Sophie walked to the center of the living room. She didn't ask for a microphone. She didn't need one. Her voice had always been the kind that filled a room whether you wanted it to or not. Can I have everyone's attention for just a second? I know tonight is about remembering Daniel, and I think what I'm about to share is something he would have wanted you all to know. A hush fell over the room. I set down my glass of wine and looked at her, a strange unease creeping up my spine. Sophie held Lucas up slightly, as if presenting him. Most of you know I had a baby earlier this year. What you don't know is who his father is. She paused, letting the silence thicken. Lucas's father is Daniel, my sister's husband. Daniel and I were together for over a year before he passed. For about 3 seconds, the room was perfectly still. Then it erupted. Gasps, whispered conversations. A few people looking back and forth between me and Sophie, like they were watching a car accident in slow motion. I stood there frozen, my body refusing to process what my ears had just heard. Sophie wasn't done. She reached into her oversized bag and pulled out a manila folder. I also have a copy of Daniel's will, a revised version he wrote 6 months before he died. In it, he leaves 60% of his estate, including this house, to his son Lucas. She looked directly at me. I'm sorry, Clara. I know this is hard, but Lucas deserves what his father wanted him to have. The room was spinning. I gripped the edge of the dining table to keep myself upright. Every pair of eyes in the house was burning into me, some with pity, some with shock, most with that horrible, morbid curiosity that people can't help but feel when someone else's life is falling apart in front of them. I turned to my parents, desperate. Mom? Dad? Say something. Tell her she's out of her mind. My father wouldn't look at me. He stared at the floor, his jaw tight. My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue and said, almost in a whisper, Sweetheart, Sophie told us about this a few months ago. We didn't know how to bring it up. We thought it would be better if what? If she ambushed me at my husband's memorial? My mother flinched. The room had gone so quiet I could hear the catering trays cooling on the counter. I looked around at all those faces. Not a single person stepped forward. Not one person said, this is wrong. Not one person told Sophie to stop. They just watched, like an audience at a show. I walked out of my own house that night. I got in my car and drove to a parking lot 3 miles away and sat there for 2 hours, shaking so hard my teeth chattered even though it was the middle of June. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my family, was crumbling like wet paper in my hands. The next morning, I woke up on my couch still in the blue dress. My phone had 47 missed calls and over 100 text messages. Most were from my parents. A few were from relatives at the memorial, some expressing sympathy, others gently suggesting I do the right thing for the baby. One was from Sophie's attorney. It was a formal demand letter, requesting immediate mediation regarding the division of Daniel's estate, citing the revised will and Lucas's alleged paternity. I couldn't eat. I couldn't think straight. All I could do was replay Sophie's words, replay the image of my parents looking away, replay Daniel's face in my memory, searching for any sign, any clue that he'd been living a double life. But here's the thing. Even in my darkest moment, something didn't add up. Daniel had been sick for the last 3 months of his life. Before that, he'd been working 60-hour weeks on a major project. Sophie lived 45 minutes away in Hoboken. When exactly was this supposed affair happening? And the will, Daniel was meticulous about everything. He'd shown me his estate documents just 2 months before his diagnosis. There was no mention of Sophie, no mention of any child, no mention of anything other than everything goes to my wife Clara. Still, the photos. Sophie had shown photos at the memorial to a few people after her announcement, screenshots of text conversations, a picture of Daniel and Sophie at what looked like a restaurant, another one at some kind of hotel lobby. They looked real. They looked damning. 3 days later, I called an attorney. Her name was Rachel Park, a friend of a friend from college who specialized in estate litigation. She was direct, sharp, and didn't waste a single word. I liked her immediately. We sat in her office and I laid out everything. The announcement, the will, the photos, my parents' betrayal. Rachel listened without interrupting, then leaned back in her chair. I'll be honest with you, Clara. If that will holds up and if they can establish paternity, this gets complicated fast. New Jersey law takes alleged biological children seriously in estate disputes, even without a formal acknowledgement from the father. The fact that your parents are supporting her claim makes it worse. Courts pay attention to family testimony. I felt my chest tighten. So what do I do? First, we challenge the will. I want to see the original, not a copy. Second, we demand a paternity test. That's non-negotiable. If Daniel is really that baby's father, science will prove it. If he's not, everything else falls apart. That night, I called Margaret. I hadn't told her about the memorial yet. I'd been too ashamed, too broken, too afraid that this final blow might destroy her too. But when I finally described what Sophie had done, Margaret went quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was calm and steady, but there was iron underneath it. Clara, listen to me carefully. I need to see you tomorrow. In person. There's something I need to give you. Daniel asked me to keep it safe, and I promised him I would only use it if someone tried to hurt you. My heart nearly stopped. What are you talking about? Not over the phone. Tomorrow. Come to my house. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I drove to Margaret's small ranch house in Summit. She met me at the door with coffee already poured and led me to the kitchen table, where a plain white envelope and a small USB drive sat waiting. Margaret sat across from me and folded her hands. Before I show you this, I need to tell you what Daniel told me. About 7 months before he was diagnosed, he came to me very upset. He said Sophie had been contacting him, showing up at his office, sending him messages. At first it was friendly, asking for advice about a job, small talk. Then it escalated. She started flirting. She sent him photos. She suggested they meet privately. My stomach turned. What did he do? He shut it down, every single time. He told her it was inappropriate and that he loved you. But Sophie didn't stop. She got more aggressive. She told him that if he didn't cooperate, she'd make his life difficult. He wanted to tell you, but he knew how sensitive your relationship with your family was. He didn't want to cause a rift unless he absolutely had to. Margaret pushed the USB drive toward me. So he did what Daniel always did. He prepared. I plugged the USB into my laptop with shaking hands. Inside was a folder labeled Insurance. It contained dozens of screenshots of text messages between Daniel and Sophie. In them, Sophie was relentless, suggestive, aggressive. Daniel's responses were clear and consistent. Sophie, this is not happening. Please stop contacting me. I love Clara. There was more. A screenshot of a conversation between Sophie and someone named Kyle, dated 4 months before Daniel died. In it, Sophie wrote, "The plan is working. Once the baby is born, I'll say it's his. He's too sick to fight it. By the time anyone figures it out, I'll already have the money." Kyle responded, "What about Clara?" Sophie replied, "What about her? She'll be too busy crying to notice." I stared at the screen, unable to breathe. Underneath the screenshots was a scanned copy of a private investigator's report that Daniel had commissioned. The PI had confirmed that Sophie was in a relationship with a man named Kyle Baxter throughout the entire period she claimed to be involved with Daniel. There were photos of Sophie and Kyle together, dates and locations documented, hotel receipts under Kyle's name. At the bottom of the folder was a single text file. Daniel had written it himself. The date on it was 3 weeks before his diagnosis. If you're reading this, it means something went wrong and someone is trying to use lies to hurt Clara. Everything in this folder is real. I collected it because I know my sister-in-law is capable of terrible things, and I refuse to let Clara fight alone. Mom, please give this to Clara if she ever needs it. She's the love of my life. Protect her for me. I sat at Margaret's kitchen table and cried harder than I had since the day he died. But these weren't tears of grief. They were tears of relief mixed with a love so fierce it felt like it could burn a hole through my chest. Daniel had never betrayed me. Even facing his own mortality, he was still thinking 3 steps ahead, still trying to shield me from the people who wanted to tear me apart. Margaret placed her hand on mine. He loved you more than anything in this world, and I made him a promise. Now let me help you keep it. I brought everything to Rachel the next morning. She went through the USB drive file by file, and with each document, her expression shifted from cautious to something that looked a lot like satisfaction. "This changes everything," she said. "But we're still going to demand that DNA test. I want this case to be airtight, belt and suspenders." Sophie's attorney initially pushed back on the DNA test. They argued that Daniel had been cremated and no direct comparison was possible. Rachel was ready for that. She filed a motion requesting that Margaret, as Daniel's biological mother, provide a DNA sample for grandparent comparison testing. The science was solid, and the judge approved it without hesitation. In the weeks that followed, Sophie's attorney submitted the revised will to the court. Rachel hired a forensic document examiner who determined within days that the signatures didn't match Daniel's known handwriting samples. The document had been created using a template downloaded from a legal forms website, and the metadata showed it was generated on a computer registered to Sophie's home address 3 months after Daniel's death. The court date arrived on a gray Tuesday in October. The courtroom was small but packed. My parents sat behind Sophie. My father in a suit he clearly hadn't worn in years. My mother clutching her purse like a life preserver. A handful of relatives from the memorial filled the gallery, craning their necks. Sophie had dressed the part perfectly. Simple black dress, minimal jewelry, eyes red as if she'd been crying all morning. She took the stand first, weaving her story with the precision of someone who'd rehearsed it 100 times. She described secret dates, whispered phone calls, stolen weekends while I was supposedly visiting friends. She produced more photos, printed and organized in a neat binder. She cried at all the right moments. She called Daniel the love of my life without a trace of irony. My mother took the stand next, confirming Sophie's timeline, her voice breaking as she described how Sophie had confided in her during the pregnancy. My father followed, stiff and uncomfortable, stating that Daniel had privately expressed excitement about the baby during a family gathering. The lies were coordinated, seamless, almost beautiful in their construction. For a moment, even I could feel the room tilting towards sympathy for Sophie. Then Rachel stood up. Your Honor, the defense would like to submit several pieces of evidence. She started with the forensic analysis of the will. The document examiner took the stand and methodically dismantled Sophie's cornerstone evidence. The signature was inconsistent with 14 known samples of Daniel's handwriting. The document was created digitally 3 months after Daniel's death. The metadata was irrefutable. Sophie's attorney objected, scrambling, but the damage was done. I could see the judge's expression shift, just slightly, from neutral to attentive. Next, Rachel introduced the PI's report documenting Sophie's ongoing relationship with Kyle Baxter during the exact time period she claimed to be involved with Daniel. Hotel receipts, photographs, social media posts Sophie had apparently forgotten to delete before launching her scheme. Then came the text messages. Rachel projected them onto a screen. Daniel's clear, repeated rejections of Sophie's advances, and then the conversation between Sophie and Kyle, the one where she laid out her entire plan in black and white. The courtroom went dead silent as people read the words on the screen. I watched Sophie's face drain of color, watched her lawyer whisper urgently in her ear. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father closed his eyes. But Rachel wasn't finished. She called Margaret to the stand. Margaret walked to the front of the courtroom with the quiet dignity of a woman who had buried her only child and still found the strength to keep fighting. She told the court about Daniel's character, about his visit to her 7 months before his death, about the USB drive he'd entrusted to her. And finally, Your Honor, we have the results of the DNA comparison test. Rachel handed the sealed report to the judge. The courtroom held its collective breath as he opened the envelope and reviewed the contents. After what felt like an eternity, he looked up. Based on the DNA analysis comparing the minor child's sample with that of the paternal grandmother, there is no biological relationship between the child known as Lucas and the deceased, Daniel. The probability of paternity is 0. Sophie let out a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a moan. She gripped the edge of the table in front of her, her carefully constructed mask finally cracking. No, that's not right. They made a mistake. Test it again. The judge's voice was firm. The evidence before this court is overwhelming. The purported will has been demonstrated to be a forgery created after the decedent's death. The claim of paternity has been conclusively disproven by DNA evidence. Furthermore, the evidence suggests a deliberate and premeditated scheme to defraud the lawful beneficiary of the estate. He paused, looking directly at Sophie. This court finds entirely in favor of the defendant, Clara. The plaintiff's claims are dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the county prosecutor's office for investigation of potential fraud, forgery, and perjury. The gavel came down, and something inside me unclenched for the first time in almost a year. Sophie was still shaking her head, muttering to herself, when my parents rushed to her side. My mother was sobbing openly. My father looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last hour. As I gathered my things, they intercepted me in the hallway. My mother reached for my arm. Clara, please! We had no idea she was lying. She showed us proof. She convinced us. You have to believe that we never meant to hurt you. I looked at my mother's tear-streaked face, then at my father, who couldn't even meet my eyes. For a long moment, I said nothing. Then I spoke, calmly and clearly. You stood in my home, at my husband's memorial, and watched your daughter accuse him of adultery in front of everyone we knew. You didn't ask a single question. You didn't demand proof. You didn't come to me privately first. You just believed her. For months, while I was drowning in grief, you chose her side without ever once picking up the phone to ask me if I was okay. You showed up at that memorial knowing what she was going to do. You let it happen. My mother started to protest, but I held up my hand. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done. Whatever Sophie told you, you chose to believe it because it was easier than standing up for me. That's not something I can forgive. Not because I'm bitter, but because I finally understand that I deserve people in my life who don't need to be convinced to believe in me. I pulled out my phone, and right there in front of them, I blocked both their numbers. My mother called out my name as I walked away, but I didn't turn around. Some doors, once closed, need to stay shut. Margaret was waiting for me by the elevator. She searched my face, then asked softly, "How are you holding up?" I took a deep breath and felt, for the first time in months, like the air actually reached my lungs. I'm going to be okay. I really think I'm going to be okay. She smiled and her eyes glistened. Good, because Daniel would want you to be more than okay. He'd want you to be happy. 3 months have passed since the trial. The prosecutor's office opened a formal investigation into Sophie's fraud. She's facing charges for forgery and perjury. Kyle Baxter, her boyfriend and apparent co-conspirator, was also named in the investigation. My parents haven't been charged with anything, but from what I've heard through the grapevine, they've become social pariahs in our hometown. People don't forget watching a family implode in open court. As for me, I went back to teaching. Fourth graders, messy and loud and full of questions about everything. They don't know about my past, and I like it that way. On weekends, Margaret and I have dinner together. Sometimes we cook at her place. Sometimes we try a new restaurant Daniel would have liked. She tells me stories about him as a kid, how he once tried to build a robot out of kitchen appliances when he was 9, how he cried during his middle school graduation because he was sad it was over. Those stories don't hurt anymore. They make me feel like he's still here, just a little bit. Last week, I was cleaning out the last of Daniel's things from the upstairs closet. Behind a stack of old textbooks, I found a birthday card he'd written me, but never had the chance to give. It was for my 33rd birthday, which fell 2 weeks after he passed. Inside, in his careful handwriting, he'd written, "Clara, every year with you has been the best year of my life. I know things aren't easy right now, but I need you to know something. You are the strongest person I've ever met, even when you don't feel strong. Whatever comes next, trust yourself. You've always had everything you need. I love you. Always. Daniel." I sat on the closet floor and held that card against my chest for a long time. I wasn't crying because I missed him, though I did. I was crying because after everything, after the betrayal and the lies and the courtroom and the silence of my own parents, his words were still true. I did have everything I needed. Maybe not everything I wanted, but everything I needed. Life didn't turn out the way I planned. I thought I'd grow old with Daniel. I thought my sister and I would eventually become close. I thought my parents would always have my back. None of that happened. Instead, I got a mother-in-law who became my family. I got a courtroom victory that felt less like winning and more like surviving. I got a USB drive full of proof that the man I married loved me so completely that he tried to protect me even after he was gone. And most of all, I got the one thing no one could forge, fabricate, or steal from me: the truth. If you're watching this and you're going through something that makes you feel like the whole world is against you, let me tell you what I wish someone had told me that night in the parking lot. The people who are meant to stay in your life won't need to be begged to believe in you. And sometimes, the family you choose is stronger than the one you were born into. Don't give up. Even when the evidence looks bad, even when the people who should love you the most are the ones holding the knife, the truth has a way of coming out. And when it does, it's louder than any lie. Thank you for listening to my story. If it meant something to you, leave a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And subscribe to Revenge Diary, because trust me, this isn't the only story I have to tell.